6,000 crosses on a road. That is where the Spartacus story reaches us. In 71 BC, after the rebellion was crushed, Appian says roughly 6,000 survivors were crucified along the Appian Way, the great road between Capua and Rome, a punishment. And, in effect, a warning. This is what happens when enslaved people turn escape into war. The road did more than mark defeat. It made Crassus's victory visible to anyone moving between Capua and Rome, a public aftermath that could be read as order restored. Spartacus left no archive of his own. What survived came through Roman enemies, Roman politicians, and Roman winners, people whose accounts and later reputations were tied to making the rebellion unforgettable. So the first question is not only who Spartacus was, it is who gained power from the way Rome remembered him. That is the first clue. The Spartacus who reaches us passed through the hands of people with every reason to control what his revolt meant. The evidence has two problems. Who was the real Spartacus, as far as we can see, and how did Rome turn his rebellion into a weapon for Roman power? Spartacus left no memoir, no manifesto, no rebel archive from Vesuvius or southern Italy. The voices we have are Roman. Plutarch, writing moral biography, Appian, writing later history inside the world Rome created, and Sallust, surviving in fragments, closer to the crisis, but still an aristocrat, writing about a war Rome feared. That does not make them useless. It makes them evidence with fingerprints on the page. So when the sources describe events, we test them against geography, politics, and Roman incentives. When they imply motives, we call that inference. And when later centuries make Spartacus a perfect freedom fighter, a mere criminal, or a clean Hollywood hero, we ask what the ancient record can actually bear. The trail begins in 73 BC, not in the Senate, but in Capua, inside a slave system that had made revolt possible before any Roman politician could profit from it. Before Rome could weaponize the revolt, a door had to open in Capua. In 73 BC, the spark came from Capua, at the gladiator school of Lentulus Batiatus. The ancient accounts differ, but preserve the same shape. Enslaved fighters planned a breakout. The plan was discovered or threatened, and only about 70 escaped. This was not a clean revolution announced with a written program. Plutarch says they first seized kitchen knives, spits, and other makeshift tools before capturing proper weapons on the road. Strip away the arena image for a second. The first scene is closer to a kitchen, a gate, road dust, and men moving before the alarm closed around them. This is where Spartacus enters the evidence, but not as a clear portrait. Plutarch calls him a Thracian, and later tradition often treats that as the safest starting point. Some accounts suggest he had known Roman military service before enslavement, which could help explain his discipline and tactics, but his childhood, exact path into bondage, and final political vision are beyond reach. That uncertainty matters. The familiar Spartacus often arrives already polished, noble face, single mission, clean purpose. The ancient evidence gives us a dangerous man emerging from a violent institution, surrounded by enslaved men with every reason to run, fight, and keep moving. Capua was not isolated. Southern Italy was thick with estates, workshops, herds, fields, and households dependent on enslaved labor. Think storage jars, field rows, animal pens, tools locked away at night, and people treated as inventory. Rome's conquests had poured captives into the peninsula for generations, and elite wealth rested on people bought, transported, branded, trained, rented, and worked. So 70 escaped men entered a landscape crowded with people who understood capture. The breakout was combustible, because Rome had built a system where one breach could become a signal to thousands trapped behind it. Once that signal moved beyond Capua, Rome made a familiar imperial mistake. It treated the outbreak as smaller than the system that had produced it. At first, this did not look like a foreign invasion or a great civil war. It looked like a local security emergency. Escaped gladiators, armed bands, disorder in the countryside. Send men, contain it, restore order. But Spartacus and his followers did not stay where Rome expected. They moved through southern Italy, using hills, roads, estates, and pastureland to hide and grow. Every farm worked by chained labor, every flock watched by armed herdsmen, every workshop full of captives became a possible point of contact. The group that began at Capua became harder to classify. Ancient writers describe gladiators, field laborers, Thracians, Gauls, Germans, and others joining. That does not mean they wanted the same future. Some may have wanted to cross the Alps and vanish beyond Roman reach. Some may have wanted revenge, food, weapons, plunder, or simply one more day without an owner. That fracture matters. The clean legend of one united liberation army does not fit the evidence. The rebellion was powerful, but unstable. A coalition built under pressure, fed by terror, opportunity, hunger, and success. Then the defeats began. Roman forces sent against the rebels were beaten more than once. Each defeat changed the revolt's meaning: policing failure, embarrassment, danger, political crisis. On the map, the escape route became a wound through Italy, and every Roman defeat made the Senate look weaker before men who knew how to profit from weakness. In that weakness, Marcus Licinius Crassus saw his opening. Crassus was already deep inside the ruling class, a senator, former commander, and one of the richest men in the Republic. His fortune came from land, mines, speculation, and the cold mathematics of crisis. Plutarch's hostile moral portrait even links him to buying burned or endangered property cheaply, an anecdote that may reveal reputation as much as biography. Disaster, in that tradition, became ownership. Wealth alone did not make a Roman immortal. In the late Republic, dominant men needed victories, soldiers, and names remembered in camps. Pompey had that aura. Crassus needed more of it. When Roman commanders were humiliated by Spartacus, the Senate's embarrassment became Crassus's opportunity. He received command, and the war changed shape. Rome was no longer relying on scattered officials to contain a slave revolt. The crisis was now in the hands of a man whose resources could help turn command into manpower, equipment, and obligation. Ancient accounts say, Crassus raised new legions. Modern historians usually see his wealth as part of what made that possible. The financing should be handled carefully, because Rome still gave him legal command. This was not simply a rogue army. The political meaning is clear enough without overstating it. Private wealth helped support public force. Then he made the army afraid of him. Appian and Plutarch both describe Crassus reviving decimation after troops failed under pressure. A disgraced unit was divided into groups of 10. Lots were drawn. One man in each 10 was selected to die at the hands of the others. The message was simple. Fear of Spartacus was no excuse. If soldiers ran from the rebels, their own command structure could become more terrifying than the enemy. Rome answered a rebellion born from slavery, with discipline built on terror, and the record shows Crassus as the commander who imposed it. The gold coin on the evidence board is no longer just wealth, it is command. As Crassus drove south, the campaign stopped looking like a simple chase. Spartacus was under pressure in southern Italy, with Crassus trying to force the war into a corner before the rebels could break away again. The ancient accounts disagree on campaign details, including routes and failed negotiations, so any clean map is more certain than the evidence beneath it. The direction is still clear. Crassus was closing in. News from another front changed the timing. Another Roman army was coming back from Spain. Pompey. He was not a minor officer. Pompey already carried the prestige of major commands, and his return put a second Roman reputation near the slave war's ending. For Spartacus, it meant another force entering the field. For Crassus, it tightened the calendar. If Pompey arrived before the war was finished, public credit might not follow the hardest fighting. It might follow the man visible at the end. That is the pressure inside the campaign. Spartacus was trapped by legions, terrain, hunger, and Roman discipline, and by a Roman political world where commanders measured victory in Senate-facing credit. The Senate was not only issuing commands from a distance, it was the place where reputations became offices. Crassus needed an ending that clearly belonged to him. Pompey had every incentive to attach himself to the conclusion. Between them was a rebel army running out of room. The final phase was not only military collapse, it was a race over who would own the ending. With Pompey's shadow approaching, the ending compressed. Crassus caught the main rebel force in 71 BC. The accounts differ in details, but not in result. Spartacus's army was broken in battle. The force that had embarrassed Roman commanders, moved through Italy, and turned plantations into recruiting ground, was crushed by the man who needed the victory most. Later storytelling wants a clean final image, Spartacus surrounded, sword in hand, falling as the perfect last rebel. The sources do not give that with certainty. They say he fought fiercely, they say the slaughter was heavy, then they leave a strange absence. Spartacus's body was not found. That matters, not because it proves escape, there is no good evidence for that, but because it denied Rome the neat trophy it wanted. No displayed corpse, no captured rebel king dragged through the city, no final face pinned to the crime. At the edge of that broken army, Pompey arrived. About 5,000 fugitives from the rebel army, fleeing after Crassus's victory, ran north into Pompey's path. Pompey destroyed them. Militarily, this was not the main battle. Politically, it was exactly the kind of ending Pompey could spend. In the tradition preserved by Plutarch, Pompey wrote to the Senate that Crassus had defeated the gladiators in open battle, but that he himself had plucked up the war by the roots. It was a brilliant sentence. It gave Crassus the labor and Pompey the ending. Crassus had done the campaign, discipline, pursuit, and decisive defeat. Pompey took the last surviving branch and framed it as the root. This is where the ending gets hijacked. Rome's commanders were measuring credit as much as corpses. Crassus needed Spartacus to prove wealth could become command, and command could become honor. Pompey made Spartacus a closing line in a larger resume, another danger removed, another reason Rome should treat him as indispensable. The rebel army was gone, but two victorious Roman armies now stood behind two ambitious men, both looking toward Rome. So the war did not end as peace, it ended as a display. According to Appian, Crassus ordered roughly 6,000 captured survivors crucified along the Appian Way, the road between Capua and Rome. The geography did some of the speaking. Capua was where the escape began. Rome was where political memory was made. Anyone traveling that route would pass the bodies, and the message later readers can see in the placement, "Rebellion ends here." For enslaved people, the warning was obvious. Run, fight, join a rising, and Rome will not simply kill you in a field, it can turn your death into a road sign. The warning also pointed upward. The Senate had watched praetors fail, consuls fail, and Italy burn with panic. Now Crassus had the visible proof of restored order. Pompey had his claim that he finished the war. Each man had an army, a victory story, and thousands of soldiers still under command. By Roman custom, armies were not supposed to become arguments at the city gates. Yet in 71 BC, both Crassus and Pompey kept forces near Rome while seeking the consulship for the following year. Pompey was technically too young and had not followed the normal ladder of offices. Crassus had legal standing, but needed the public weight of victory. Their military prestige pressed on the system until the system made room. In 70 BC, they became joint consuls. That did not make either man a dictator. It did not by itself create the empire. It did show a dangerous habit forming in the Republic. When institutions hesitated, commanders with armies could make hesitation expensive. Spartacus had not broken Rome from outside. The record shows Rome taking the fear left by his rebellion and rewarding men who could bend the Republic from within. That is where the evidence leaves us. No clean legend, just a damaged record marked by power. The Spartacus we can recover is real, but incomplete. We see him mostly through Roman eyes, through writers who came later, belonged to the world he frightened, and had reasons to make the war mean something. They show a commander dangerous enough to defeat Roman forces, gather thousands, and force the Republic to stop treating enslaved people as background machinery. They do not give us a manifesto. They do not let us safely make him a modern abolitionist hero or reduce him to the monster Rome needed. What we can see more clearly is who came out of the story with power. Crassus turned victory into authority. Pompey turned the remnants of defeat into credit. The Senate, faced with armies and reputations it could not easily contain, bent around both men. That is the darker ending. A rebellion born from Rome's slave system did not shatter that system. Rome absorbed the terror, staged the punishment, polished the victory, and handed greater power to commanders who could rule through fear and force. Spartacus became a myth because later ages needed him to mean freedom. In his own time, the immediate winners were the men who made his revolt useful. The cracked helmet, the gold coin, the road of crosses. They belong to one story: a rebel who lost, and a republic learning to turn crisis into command.